Guest is the founder of B2B Clarity and the author of the book On Purpose, the CEO's Guide to Marketing with Meaning. He says marketing isn't something you do, it's part of who you are. That's an interesting reframe. I'd love to dive into it and figure out if it actually leads to revenue growth, and if so, how. But first, hello and welcome to the Predictable B2B Success podcast brought to you by Sproutwood.com. I'm Vinay Koshy and our guest is Pete Steege. Pete, welcome to the show. I believe you've actually worked in various corporations. In fact, you've also you've got well over 30 years of marketing experience, primarily in the B2B tech space, if I'm not mistaken, and manufacturing businesses, everything from 50-person Silicon Valley startups to Fortune 100 firms. You worked across North America, Europe, and Asia as well. So a wealth of experience there. I'm curious, why leave the corporate world and start B2B Clarity?
That's a great question. And Vinay, thanks for having me today. I'm really excited for our chat. So for me, yeah, I never, until 4 years ago when I started B2B Clarity, I never considered doing anything other than working inside of a business. I never worked for an agency. I always was a marketer immersed in a brand. And I told myself that's what I need to do because I get fully engaged. I know that it takes investment to know the business and to know the information and the brand. And it really didn't occur to me until it did. And I think I was going through a rough period with my job. The work was going okay, but I wasn't satisfied. And I just reflected and realized that I wasn't spending very small amount of my time helping clients with the stuff I know I can help them with. Because 30 years of marketing experience, I picked up a lot of how what works and what doesn't. A lot of it was intuitive or just in the bloodstream. And I found that I wasn't getting a chance to share that in the business I was working in. So I decided to go and look for businesses that had the challenges that I knew I could help and provide them help in making marketing work in their business. And so here I am 4 years later. I'm loving the work. I really enjoy it. And I saw in your background, stories is a big part of what you do. That's for me too. I talk about meaning, but essentially what I'm saying is the real stuff, getting to the real story. I say true story is what I see is often missing, especially with technology B2B companies where the owner is really good at that technology or that product and the business is really good at that, but that owner finds themselves having to be a CEO and understand marketing and they don't. So it's a great opportunity to come in and give them a lift. And I enjoy it a lot.
As you made that transition, was the problem that you were trying to address just clarity, even back then, or was it just that you felt a deep desire to help people?
It was a couple of things. Clarity was part of it, but I think that's more an outcome. The problem I saw was there was a couple things. One, these technical forward people, and this isn't just technical people that do this, but it's a common mistake in marketing.
Mhm.
I believe that people talk about what they do. They want to share those acronyms and the capabilities of their solution and how the performance and how great it is when that doesn't really work with marketing. Your clients don't really care about you. They care about how you can help them with their problem. So I found that was the one of the main things I could help them with was pivoting and translating their story from instead of being about
Mhm.
them, being about their prospects and the ways they can help the prospects. That was one thing. The other thing was just people trying to do too much. I've found that marketing is uniquely tempting as far as functions in a business in terms of it's so easy to do things. Some of the applications are free, right? Some of the platforms you can sign up for. And even creating emails or with automated email systems, it's almost free. And the problem is it's not free because one, it takes mind share from your
Mhm.
team to do things. But two, the last thing your prospects need is more things in their inbox. So the trick is the secret recipe is, I believe, back to that meaning, finding ways to share your truth with them that help them, so are valuable to them, provide ideas and solve problems even before they buy anything from you.
Mhm.
So communication as a product almost is, I found to be really a valuable lesson for people that I work with.
Brilliant. And given your journey to date, what would you say would be your personal area of strength?
It is that clarity.
Okay.
I believe that the way I help them best is I'm able to see the forest for the trees and help them uncover that
Mhm.
truth in their business. It's when I join them to work with them, we don't know where it's going, but we always find the destination.
Mhm.
And that first uncovering of their truth, where the light bulb goes off for them and they're relieved, excited, surprised, but that's the best for me, and that is the core of the rest of the work. I think
Mhm.
is that just understanding the simple basic truth of what their business does and for who.
Certainly. In your experience, do you find that most executives, CEOs even, really thinking about meaning and thinking about their origin story and how that really translates into everything that they do, as opposed to strategies and the next thing that should be done in order to drive leads and revenue growth? And if you do share have that experience, I would imagine that it's a bit of work, perhaps a mind shift and maybe even a heart shift required to come around to your way of thinking.
It's a great question, observation. The people I help the most, and the people I work with, to be honest, I don't work with people that aren't this. They have been hitting their head against a wall for a long time with marketing.
Right.
Usually they've had three or four different vendors, one after another, that have failed them, and they that even though they told them that
Mhm.
they were going to solve their problems, they often say, Pete, our story is so complicated. We can't tell our complicated story, and that's been a challenge for them. It's not like a new idea, right?
Mhm.
They've wrestled with it and tried to solve it. And so it's not that they've come to me and said, Pete, I want you to help us come up with our true story and our origin. It's not that.
Mhm.
It's that when we work together, when we realize, you know what, if we find a way to talk about what you do that's centered around your customer's benefit
Mhm.
and your purpose in solving that problem, all of that complicated messaging gets clearer and simpler and more consistent and more intuitive and more spreadable through your
Mhm.
employees and your customers, right? So they're not looking for that
Mhm.
truth. They're really excited when we get to it because they see how having that truth solves the problems that they thought were being caused by something else.
Okay. A few questions come to mind. One, how are you finding people who have gone through three or four rough experiences? Because I don't think they'd be advertising that per
No, they're
se.
not.
So I'd be curious as to how you actually are able to find them and continue those conversations.
Yeah, so it's funny you say that. The things I look for in and I'm doing outreach like this, talking on on this podcast is a great example of me sharing some of these ideas. I wrote a book, of course, and I post videos on LinkedIn. The point of all that is so people that have the pain that I can help. And it doesn't happen often,
Mhm.
but it happens enough for me that they say, "Oh my gosh, I got to talk to this guy because this is resonates with me." What makes them what they have in common is I like to say they're accidental CEOs. So they are this technical expert and they've got a business. They're the CEO or the founder. Usually they're bootstrapping, not always, but they are the decision maker, right? They own the seat.
Mhm.
And they because of that accidental CEO role, they aren't an expert on the marketing side. But they've had to do it. So that just if I find the accidental CEOs, and I can do that in many ways.
Mhm.
It's amazing how many of them have the same symptoms. And it is this tried and failed, complicated technical story, uh, having possibly a marketer who's new earlier in their career and they can do stuff, but they don't know what to do. And the CEO has to be telling them what to do. And
Yeah.
they thought, oh, you know what? I'm going to hire a marketer and that's going to be my solution.
Mm.
And then the sad truth is when the marketer comes in, the marketer says, okay, what do you want me to do? And they're actually in a worse case because now they've invested in it
Yeah.
and there's things being done and they don't know what to tell them to
Mm.
do, right? So all those things are surprisingly consistent. It really just originates with this technician, I'll call them, that has a successful business, and these are all the things that come out in that case.
Okay. So more of an driving, more of an inbound approach is another way of putting it, I would suppose.
Yes.
As you talk to these clients, I completely understand the idea of unpacking their origin story and sharing that. When you talk about marketing with meaning, I would imagine that it has a wider implication than just the CEO. I'm curious, how do you get the rest of the staff? Because I would think it's more than just a marketing department or a marketing team that needs to be brought on. How do you get them to identify with the story, with the problem that they're trying to solve, and make it as much a part of them as it is for the CEO?
You know, I'm surprised at how um, much that's not a problem
Mhm.
for these smaller companies. And when I say smaller, I mean from 10 to 50 employees, maybe 100 or 200 employees. They're frustrated in the same way their boss
Mhm.
is. They see the inconsistency. And it also happens over time, right? Where they'll have a message that they're excited about, and then they launch a new product and the message changes materially,
Yeah.
and that's hard for them, right? Because they don't have a consistent story. So I've been surprised that's not an issue. But I will share that, if I may, I think there's three elements to marketing with meaning, driven by the leader, but for the whole company, that makes this work.
Mhm.
One is authenticity, and that's where that true story comes in. It's being knowing who you are, so knowing your own truth, but then being that thing,
Mhm.
your behavior, your product, your interactions, your communications, your website. It's more than the visual
Mhm.
brand type of things. It's everything about who you are, right? So it's back to clarity. It's everyone is clear because you're consistently not only saying the same thing, but being the same thing, right? Acting the same way.
Mhm.
That's one, authenticity. A second one is being intentional. And that gets to that do less but do it better mantra, really. Part of the reason people aren't on board is their hair's on fire with their job, and there's a new project every month or every week, and nobody can stay focused on the important things. So I found when you can zero in on just the two or three important marketing initiatives that we do the work together to figure out what would really move the needle with getting a relationship with these clients, and everybody agrees to focus on those
Mhm.
things, then that unity and that being on board just comes along with it because they all understand why. And then the third really important thing is maybe a little unusual, and that is generosity. I've found that marketing that works across the company is when the culture is such that people sincerely focus on helping the client, helping the customers, not after the sale, but the whole time,
Mhm.
not just after the sale. And there's meetings inside the company that are talking about the customer rather than about the the company, right? And the conversations ideally go from how much can we get them to pay for something to how much can we give away
Mhm.
before we charge them,
Mhm.
right? And you might say that's a soft thing, but it's the spirit of value and service that I've found when you can, led by the CEO, when you can change the culture even a little bit in that direction. There's a paradox there. The more you do that, you're actually making yourself more attractive to the market, your prospects. So you actually stand out by demonstrating generosity.
Mhm.
So I think those three things together, they're a little intangible,
Mhm.
But those three things are what create that movement of meaning. And it's really easy. I found it's really easy for the members of the team to rally around that because they feel the energy and they feel the consistency
Mhm.
and they see the reaction of the client too. They see that this is a way to win. This is actually, it's what we want to be, right?
Mhm.
We're the favored choice when we can actually do that.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, but in helping CEOs discover their true story, and are you almost in effect bringing clarity to their vision and mission?
Yes. Yeah. I talk about it as a marketing thing,
Okay.
but it ends up in the same
Mhm.
place. Vinay, it makes sense, right? If you get to the real good stuff,
Yeah.
there's a universality to
Yeah.
it. And I've heard it talked about as mission and vision, brand. People
Mhm.
talk about brand. It's all tapping into the same thing from a different door,
Yeah.
is my belief.
Certainly.
And it needs to be like that,
Mhm.
right? It can't change 6 months later. It can evolve,
Mhm.
but it really needs to be a core, a foundation.
Yep. And once that's done, obviously there needs to be a piece around having it make sense to potential clients. How do you go about refining that? Because oftentimes it's pretty raw and there is a process of refining it. How do you walk them through that?
Yeah, this isn't absolutely structured this way, but what I find happens is the true story starts with a positioning exercise. And it's really about what is it we do that nobody else
Hmm.
does and for who? And the more specific that group, my belief is, the
Hmm.
better, because you can always attract people outside of that very tight target. But the tighter the target, the more pure and undiluted and concentrated your value is,
Hmm.
right? Because you can be really specific about how you help them. So I find it always starts with that. It's like a product market fit exercise, is what I think of it
Hmm.
as. Once we have that, then there's a message map that we do that is typically it's three pillars, right? It's three messages that sum up that story of who we are, what we do, and for who and how they benefit, right? And we use an exercise called the truth chain to get to that, which I won't go into here, but it's in the book. People can find it online as well. But it's that structured way to get out of talking about your business and translate it into talking about their value of working with you. So from those three pillars, then we look for proof points. And that's to your point. That's the part that makes it real, the
Hmm.
sanity check of it. Because you want all of your stories, your customer use cases, your product benefits statements, you want all of those to fit as proof points
Hmm.
for your three pillars of your true story. And so for me, it's iterative. It starts at a very high level. Do we all agree? If you had to summarize what we say, would it be these? It's one thing, which is your positioning
Hmm.
statement. Three pillars to that. Do we agree to that? And then proof points for each of those pillars. And then from there, you've made the connection to the things you talk about anyway, your product benefits and capabilities and all that. And now you just map those to the story. So that's the point where you can sanity check and look for holes and fix things.
Right.
I'm also a big believer in iterative agile style marketing projects. I call them MVPs, minimum viable programs,
Hmm.
instead of where it's so tempting in marketing to create this huge mammoth campaign that's going to last 18 months and it's going to touch all these personas and these different channels. And in my experience, even in large marketing organizations, those rarely get finished. They end up quietly getting shut down. So I'm a big believer, especially for these smaller companies that maybe aren't marketing experts. What's the minimum thing we can do to try this, right? Is it a social post? Is it a small email campaign? Is it some content that we're going to test in certain ways? You can always add fuel to the fire if it works.
Hmm. With this process, what form does it take in terms of the actual messaging that clients get? Is it just content that appears on a website? Is it the outreach messages that the salespeople use? How does it work?
Most of the time, picture a wheel
Mhm.
and it's a rotating. wheel, and the center of that wheel, it's a content machine,
Mhm.
right? I believe that the fuel that drives this messaging, this engine, this engagement is
Mhm.
content. Not just any content, it needs to be value add, relevant content based on your experience. But I found that once we've done that previous work on the messaging and what our value is, pretty soon the next step is a brainstorm on what can we talk about that would help them.
Mhm.
Not about don't tell about our product, talk about what's the issue that we have experience. We can give them some of that insight right now, and we come up with a really healthy list, and then we figure out who's going to write the content. And sometimes I'll work with vendors, sometimes we have writers in the company. Let's figure out how it's going to get done, but we set up a process, again, not overthinking
Mhm.
it, where once a month we pick a topic and we go through a month cadence of creating content. You can do multiple in a month, but it takes a month. And for each topic, you create 3 to 5 stories, uh, blog
Mhm.
posts. Usually they're blog posts. And again, they're not selling, they're providing value and insight. And what that does is it gets you a weekly blog post that's meaty and has value. It allows you to go deep on the topic because you have 3 to 5 of these blog posts on that topic. And yet you don't have a crazy process where every week you're going through deadlines. So you do them in batches, right? You create a month's worth of this content in a batch. So that gets, then you can, that wheel, it gets posted on the blog, of course. When it gets posted, it gets put on social media. It feeds the sales team so they can share it
Mhm.
through the blog links or social with their prospecting. Periodically, we review the content, and so we're building a repository of valuable
Mhm.
insights, right? Periodically, we say, okay, now we're going to collect some of those pieces and create uh, a lead magnet, or a call to action, an offer
Mhm.
based on that building value that we've created. So it is this machine of generating valuable content that continues on steadily week by
Mhm.
week. And that is what powers your campaigns, your communications, your outreach, all those different
Mhm.
things.
So,
I found that having that recipe is so powerful because another symptom from these companies, these tech companies, is they're having these stressful meetings. We got to post the blog tomorrow. We still don't have a draft, and you got way too many people in that meeting, and it ends up just closing down. And we all know we've all seen the companies where you look on their blog and there were 5 posts 2 years ago and nothing since, and it's so common. And that's because it's not that they don't want
yeah.
to, it's that they don't have that recipe that is steady state and just drives the engine.
Mhm. As part of this, do you encourage not just CEOs, but perhaps the wider team as well to engage in some sort of thought leadership type content?
Yes, and I would say most of what I just described,
Okay.
if it's done well, it has a point of view. It is not it's not just a description of facts. It's saying, here's from our
Mhm.
experience, here's our perspective, and here's how thinking of it in this different way will help you. Almost always, that's the general tenor
Mhm.
of the content. So I call that thought leadership, frankly. Usually that
Yeah.
content takes time, but that's the umbrella effect, right?
Mhm.
You may be pinpointed on, for example, you might have an ABM strategy where you're targeting strategic clients, and that's a very focused
Mhm.
direct outreach. But in the background, you have this thought leadership content that's out there. And I didn't mention that same content that you're writing for the blog and that engine is, if you do it well, that's PR material. Some of it's great fuel for a public relations person.
Mhm. Brilliant. And in all of this, of course, there is the continual evolution of technology. Perhaps the one that's being most talked about at the moment is AI. How do you see AI being an enabler of what you've just described and disrupting?
So interesting. I think it's an enabler. and it's a destroyer.
Okay.
I believe that AI is going to break marketing as we know it today
Mhm.
in the next year to 5 years because, and you know
Mhm.
this, we've already seen it. There's a couple things going on. One, on the supply side, content is so much easier to create
Mhm.
now. At this point, I believe you can tell the difference between AI content and non-AI content. I like to say it has an AI accent.
Mhm.
Like, especially I was looking at images today. Yes, that just looks like AI created it. Today, that's an issue. I believe in a year or two or three, we're not going to be able to tell the
Mhm.
difference. It's going to accelerate so fast. Multiply that with the ability to create 10 times, 100 times, 1,000 times as many emails or articles or books or you name
Mhm.
videos, audio messages, podcasts, even, Vinay. All of those things are going to flood our consumers, our prospects. And you know what? Our prospects don't have any more time to read your excellent content that you're creating. So you have the content flooding their inbox. It's already started.
Mhm.
One way they're dealing with it is they're creating abstraction, right? They're saying, oh, I'm going to have AI summarize that book that somebody just wrote. That puts them another step more removed from your content, right? So now you have, it's getting hard. It's going to get harder and harder to reach them with the ways we know today.
Mhm.
And I think you can see it already with SEO because SEO was designed in a world that relied on Google search. And Google's still being used, but there's this whole new generative answer, the chat bots, that aren't going to point them to your website,
Mhm.
right? So all of that to me says businesses have to acknowledge, I mean, it's time to look at that and say, it's not going to work like it did before.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean there's not a solution, but I think the important point is just doing more of the same because AI helps you be more productive is a recipe for failure. So my approach with my clients is there's a twofold topic here. One is AI as a productivity tool. Absolutely.
Mhm.
I'm using it. I mean, you should use it. I believe, but then I believe it's really important to think of that as a productivity tool, even for marketing. So it can help you create content.
Mhm.
But at the end of the day, you have to change your metric. It can't be about the volume and quality of your content. It needs to be, you might be not be surprised, it needs to be the meaningfulness of the content. That's the only way you're going to break through. And I don't think we know what that looks like
Mhm.
yet, but the content that can be authentic and generous and intentional in terms of not being too much,
Mhm.
not just turning up the volume and contributing to the problem. How do you find a way to actually counterintuitively speak quietly but truthfully and impactfully in a way that they can hear it?
Mhm.
That's going to be the ones that find a way to do that are going to stand out versus all the noise. I really believe that.
That's an interesting perspective. In fact, I think it was just yesterday I posted on LinkedIn an article from an SEO expert and their experiences as well as Google, saying that Google has started to automatically not index people's websites anymore. Okay. And the only reason it indexes content is because it believes that it is particularly unique or has a value to the searcher. And my take on that is, personally, is of course that podcasts are a great way to actually provide value and original content to even things like AI. So if you've got good
Yeah.
raw material to provide AI, then there's a good chance that your content will be indexed. And even if people were to search for things on ChatGPT, for instance, there's a good chance that it'll pick your content as opposed to anything else that's looks the same as the other web pages. That's that on that end. But you also raised an interesting point about meaningfulness. And to me, I would have used the word utility, in that the content needs to have a degree of utility for it to be of interest and of meaning to the recipient. And if there isn't a way to provide that, then chances are that they're just going to skip over it and go look for answers elsewhere.
If I
Sure.
may, I believe that meaningful content has two things. Utility is
Mhm.
one of the things, and the other is beauty.
Certainly.
And by beauty, that's I'm using that
Right.
word broadly,
Yeah.
right? And I can't remember who said this, but somebody several hundred years ago quoted that all things of value have are useful and beautiful. And I think what that gets to is the utility, absolutely,
Mhm.
but the truth of it is the beauty, right? The resonance, the getting to, when you read that quote and you go, oh my gosh, that's so right in so many ways. The heft
Mhm.
of the idea, that's the beauty. And when you can, that's where I think utility is not going to be enough, because AI is going to be able to help
Mhm.
with utility. And we're going to have, again, that'll be a lot of useful
Sure.
stuff.
Yeah.
It's the things that are also beautiful, meaning pure and universal. Those That's what's going to add that. That's going to be harder for AI to add,
Mhm.
my belief.
And thank you for that perspective as well. So, looking ahead, given all that's happening, how would you recommend companies prepare themselves for that incredible content glut, or should I say, limited visibility on some of the platforms that they traditionally use, in order
Yeah.
to be heard and be visible?
A couple things. One, I think they need to have awareness of this
Mhm.
and be ready to have an open mind about the metrics and question the things that they've counted on as truthful ways to measure success in the
Mhm.
past. So SEO metrics especially, but other marketing engagement metrics, they need to be watching and observing for that changes,
Mhm.
so that they're not blindly just burning money uselessly as things change. So they have to be ready to adapt
Mhm.
tactically within the current model. I think it's, from what I said, if indeed that utility and beauty part, that truth and meaning is going to be
Mhm.
important, then to me that's all the more reason for companies to get their house in order and clarify the meaning of their business, because that's, without that, they're on shifting sand in whatever they try to do to create a story that's not something AI. It's not just parroting AI.
Mhm.
And so you have to have that as a core, just as a starting
Mhm.
place, right? You have to have that. And then I think beyond that, it's if they're not already, this is yet another reason to invest time and resources in getting up the learning curve on AI, because there's productivity, there's more operational reasons to do
Mhm.
that, but this is yet another one, an existential reason from a marketing standpoint, that the solution is going to reveal itself dynamically,
Mhm.
as far as how do you do that, how do you reach people in that content flood. And if you're not versed in AI and what it's capable of and practiced at it, you're going to miss that nuance.
Mhm.
So you do need to invest in it, especially not what you actually literally generate,
Mhm.
but helping you generate it and helping you manage it. And you got to be open to learn. I think the companies that are going to struggle the most are the ones that see AI as a magic bean, right? That it's going to solve all my problems. Look what I can do. I can do 100 times what I used to do, but nobody's going to read it.
Mhm. You make a great point there. Pete, with this idea of being on purpose and marketing with meaning, do you find that there are perhaps a couple of areas that don't get talked about very much? If so, what would they be?
Go back. I guess what I go back to is that point about generosity.
Hmm.
I think that is one that doesn't fit the standard textbooks of marketing so much, I don't think.
Yep.
We talk about customer first,
Hmm.
but it tends to be mercenary when we do talk about it. And I think beneath all of the motivation and the truth of the spirit of really putting them first, it's a paradox. And by the way, I think when you run into things that are paradoxes, I think that is close to that beauty. That's where you're near the truth of something,
Hmm.
because paradoxes, you'll find paradox in so many classic stories and understandings of the world. So I believe that's a good sign when you're talking about something like this, and there's a strong paradox. So this is where one, I think companies need to do more of truly trying to give it away, trying to give,
Mhm.
and that will come back. It's the most productive thing you can do for your business, to be selfless. It's the corporate name for selfless, stateless, or I don't know what you'd call it.
Yeah, I suppose that or evergreen would be the other where that comes to mind. But yeah,
There you go.
no, that's brilliant. Thank you for that. And to wrap up, Steve, if you were listening to this episode, what would you say would be your top takeaway?
I would say customers will engage with you only if they have a reason. And a reason comes from finding shared meaning. And so it really, if you don't, that is the core of your opportunity with marketing, whether you're doing it on purpose or not.
Mhm.
Finding the meaning is your path forward to make the connections you need to, all the more in our new AI reality that's coming.
Mhm. And if listeners are curious, want to find out more or connect with you, where would you recommend they head to?
I'm very active on LinkedIn, so they certainly can look at
Mhm.
my LinkedIn page. As you mentioned, I wrote a book on purpose, The CEO's Guide to Marketing with Meaning. That's available on Amazon if they'd
Yeah.
like to look at that. And I also have a website at b2b-clarity.com, where I have more information on this idea of getting clarity by marketing with meaning.
We'll include links to that in the show notes. Pete, thank you so much for doing this. It's been very enlightening.
I enjoyed it so much, Vinay. Thanks for having me.
No worries. A bit of feedback for me, Pete. Was there anything else I could have done better to help with your brand awareness or thought leadership?
No, I think it was great. It's great. I appreciate the thoughtful questions.